Focusing is simply the skill of helping a client pay attention to a certain part of their experience. Some clients, for example, might talk a lot about the external events or their life situation, and the therapist using focusing can help them turn their attention to their own inner experience, their feelings. The very stereotypical counsellor phrase, "So, how does that make you feel?" is, I guess, an example of focusing, because you're asking the client how the events that happen to them make them feel, encouraging them to focus on their feelings and exploring them a bit more. I'd avoid saying that though, mainly just because it is such a stereotype and it feels a bit old. Doesn't feel, to me anyway, it doesn't feel particularly genuine, mainly because I associate it with such a stereotypical response. I mean, simple questions like "how was that for you?" or "what was that like?" can be other simple ways of just asking and taking an interest and gently helping the client talk maybe a bit about their own experience of the event, especially if they're talking about the events in a detached kind of way. You're not directing them, but I do think you're probably paying attention more to certain things than others. So, for example, if someone's talking about this whole situation that's happening in their life, I think it's important to pick up on the facts of the situation. But more importantly, and I guess the purpose of therapy really is to help the client figure out their own feelings and their own meanings about the stuff that's happened to them. And so I think it can be a good thing to focus on those things. I am often almost scanning, I guess, to pick up on any feelings that the client's experiencing or how they're understanding things, so I can reflect that back to them. Or simply ask about those things if I'm not really getting that much. So if I'm not getting that much, how's that for you? What was that like? Or how does that make you feel? Can all be examples of focusing on the client's experience rather than this happened, then that happened, then this happened, focusing on the client's inner world and helping them explore that. This is important because the external situation can be interpreted in all kinds of different ways, and the client could have all kinds of feelings about that. Let's say if a parent has died recently, if we don't know what the client's experience of that is, we don't know how they're feeling. It might feel safe to assume that the client is quite upset about that. But actually, maybe they're happy about that. Maybe they're angry, maybe they're whatever. We don't know until we check that out and explore what's going on inside for them. So even if it's something like a bereavement, it's only the internal responses that we are ultimately wanting to understand and help them understand. The external situation, like the fact that somebody close to them has died recently, that gives us a context, but that's not really the ultimate focus of the therapy. The ultimate focus of the therapy is on their internal world and helping them figure that out. And that's ultimately what focusing is about, helping them explore that. An interesting one that students can sometimes struggle with when I've observed people in skills practice is when the student is counselling a client. The client's another student, because that's how it works in skills practice on the course. But let's say the client is talking about someone else they know who is in a much worse situation seemingly than they are. Let's say they have a friend who has gone through some serious disaster, or maybe they're seriously ill and having a really difficult time with things and they're really depressed as a result, this friend. The counsellor in that situation, it's easy to slip into how bad it is and the facts of the situation in relation to the friend, but ultimately the client is your client, and so the focus, and your focusing is really useful here, is on the client's experience. So maybe the client's concern about their friend. We don't talk about the friend's depression. We talk about the client's worry, the client's concern for what's happening. Whatever you notice in the room that the client is feeling, that's what you want to be focusing on. And it can be easy sometimes to get lost in this story about this person who's not in the room, basically. And focusing can help you bring it back to what the client's feeling about the stuff that we're talking about. And like with anything else, trust your instincts with this. You might get the impression sometimes that a client really wants to tell this particular story about something that's happened to them or something that's happened to their friend. You can focus on the client's experience and what feelings and what meanings they're going through in relation to stuff they're talking about, but use your instinct, because maybe sometimes the client really does just want to tell this particular story. Maybe they need to feel heard in that way before they can start exploring their inner world. There's no definite way of doing this. I think just use your intuition and trust yourself in the moment. Ultimately though, in the long run, your focus should be on the client's experience, the client's meanings, the client's feelings and their inner world. And sometimes it can be a simple word or just repeating key emotive words that the client's used. If they say that they feel angry, you can just repeat the word angry to help them notice that a bit more. Because, if they're talking and talking and talking and talking and the word angry comes up, the word devastated comes up, the word sickened comes up, the word, whatever. If you can just hone in on that and even just say the word, it can help them become a bit more aware of that emotive experience that they're drawing from and help them maybe go into it a bit more. On some occasions, you could even ask, like, what is that like? If someone's talking about anger, you could even say, you're talking about anger and it sounds like you are feeling really angry about it. If we just look at that anger, or if we just step into that, like, what does that feel like? How is that for you? And that can be a really good way as well of helping the client focus on their experiences, come to be more aware of them and understand them better. Observing changes in the client as well can be a good use of focusing too. So for example, if they are angry and we go into the anger and there's lots of feelings in there, maybe there's anger, but there's also sadness as well. To observe that can be, quite useful. So even if we were to just say, like, earlier on it sounds like you were really angry, but now we've talked about it, it sounds like you are angry, but it sounds like there's quite a bit of sadness in there as well. Just to observe that and let them see that, because they're not going to be able to zoom out like that. They're in it, so it's harder for them to see things like that. So to be able to step back and observe anything like that that's coming up, if you notice anything that's changed or developed in the last few minutes, then it can be a useful thing to observe that. Some of these observations might seem really obvious to you, but that's just because you're a separate person. To the client, it can be really useful, so that's worth thinking about as well. The final thing I want to mention before we end this video is about focusing oriented psychotherapy, which is very closely related to this skill and very complementary of the person-centered approach in general. I wanted to mention it mainly just to kind of avoid confusion, because this video is really just about the skill that you'd use in a person-centered counselling room. And I probably will do a video about the approach at some point, but probably not for a while. It'll be one of these that I do after I've released the course. So if you're curious, feel free to have a Google and see what you think of it.